All hell is breaking loose as Moscow is on fire. Ukrainian drones and Ukrainian FP5 ballistics hitting Russia hard. Moscow Oblast, which includes many of these Wildberry logistical centers and other adjacent logistical centers, being hit hard by Zelensky in the past 24 to 48 hours. Also, Kyiv has been hit very hard by Putin. We're going to cover it all. I just want to show you what's going down right now. Let me share with you the moment of the attack on the Wildberries logistical facility in the Moscow Oblast. You'll see right here, Ukrainian drones, likely FP1 or FP2s, slamming into this logistical center right here in the Moscow Oblast. And again, Wildberries, it's like the Amazon in Russia. And about half of all of the Wildberries in Russia right now have been destroyed by Zelensky and Ukraine. Here, play this clip.
Еще один летит.
Now, you saw the drone strike. Let me show you what it looks like right now in Moscow following the strike. Let's play it. And now Ukraine released this video showing what its FP5 Flamingo cruise missiles look like. And you can see these cruise missiles travel, they have a range of up to 2,500, 3,000 kilometers, and they've shown they've been able to hit targets there. Ukraine just released this video of the Firepoint, as they're called. Firepoint 5. Here, play this clip. And we're also getting footage right here of the Ukrainian Air Force MiG-29 Fulcrum flying away from an exploding Russian drone that had just shot down. You can see this MiG-29 protecting the Ukrainian homeland right here. Let's play it. Ukrainian attack drones also successfully hit a second Russian logistical facility in Moscow this morning, setting it ablaze. I'll show you what that looked like. Let's play it. And now here's another angle of the Wildberries facility in the Moscow Oblast on fire. Let's play it.
Ебать, а ну нахуй пизда.
I'll run some B-roll right now for you. You can see these Ukrainian mid-range strike drones that just continue to target the Russian rear area military logistics behind the eastern front line area. As the open source intelligence technical account puts it, seen here, you can see a collection of the hits of certain Russian transport vehicles right over there. Also, additional footage coming in right now. This of Russia's RKC Progress rocket plant in Samara exploding early in the morning. Those FP5s, those Firepoint 5 cruise missiles I was showing you earlier, made impact in Samara. Samara about 900 to 1,000 kilometers from the front. So these FP5s traveled far to get here. This plant was a key manufacturer for Russia's primary space launching vehicles right over here. Show you the photo. Ukrainian Flamingo cruise missiles hitting the RKC Progress in Samara this morning. Show you this other photo right here. This is the Wildberries e-commerce facility. Another angle of it right here in Moscow Oblast. More of it here. You can see behind this apartment complex in Moscow. Now, Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov just spoke on Friday. Here's what he said. Putin has made it clear that all the objectives of the special military operation by Russia in Ukraine will be achieved. I watch the reports from the front. They're impressive young men, resolute and proud of their country. And the voices coming from there after the capture of another settlement say, the enemy will be defeated. Victory will be ours. Our cause is just. Lavrov goes on to say, the EU invented this concept a long time ago. It doesn't appear in a single document, this concept of the shadow fleet. They essentially imposed a ban on trading Russian energy resources, and all ships that refuse to obey the European Union, regardless of their flag, are declared part of the, quote, shadow fleet. They have essentially given themselves permission not only to stop and inspect these ships, but to seize their cargo, sell it, and use the proceeds to transfer money to Ukraine. He goes on to say, at an event in Oceania with partners in the Philippines, the Japanese minister said they discussed bilateral issues and the regional situation with Lavrov. I was struck because it happened during a formal banquet with all the ministers seated around a long table. Suddenly, someone touched me on the shoulder from behind. I turned around, and there was our Japanese colleague who said, I'm glad to see you. How are you? I didn't even have time to stand up. I shook his hand. He went back to his seat. And apparently, this is what they meant by saying bilateral regional issues were discussed. Russia's stock market had a very bad day on Friday as well after Lavrov's comments that the so-called special military operation, as they're calling the invasion of Ukraine, would not be terminated anytime soon. More footage right over here from the Wild Berries warehouse. I could just show some B-roll of that to you as well. But as I note, Kyiv has been hit hard as well. Kyiv faced a missile barrage, and you can see we'll play the B-roll here. Residents of Kyiv recorded a series of Russian ballistic missile strikes on the city. Not a single one was shot down. You can see it right here for yourself, what it looked like. And again, Ukraine does not have any Patriot interceptors. And so Russia is able to strike without any even fear that their ballistics are going to be hit by Ukraine. And you can see over here, major strikes in Ukraine, major buildings. We're going to wait to get a casualty count because that looked very, very, very problematic. And those seemed like lots of strikes. Zelensky said the following: today, there are new significant results from our deep strikes. In Russia's Samara region, one of the key enterprises with Roscosmos, the Progress Center, which was involved, among other things, in electronic production was hit. Flamingo missiles were used, a good achievement. The distance from our border is about 900 kilometers. Our long-range sanctions, that's what they refer to striking these facilities deep inside of Russia. They call them long-range sanctions, is how Zelensky refers to it. Our long-range sanctions also reach the Savalaika air base, where the carriers of Russian missiles that strike our cities and villages are based, about 700 kilometers from Ukraine. We have also confirmation of damage we were aiming to inflict at an oil facility in the Ust-Luga, more than 800 kilometers from our border. I'm grateful for all of the units involved for their accuracy. Our plan of long-range sanctions against Russia for this war is being implemented, and it is important that Russia's war potential be reduced. Peace is needed, and this must be evident in Russia through concrete damage to specific facilities. Glory to Ukraine. And then Zelensky also talks about, we continue working to secure air defenses for Ukraine, the missiles needed to protect the lives, and agreements for production in Ukraine. All of this will happen. It's not easy, but all of this will happen. And he says every delay that happens is happening at the political level costs lives. It is important to act quickly, focus all our efforts on protecting lives and limiting Russia's resources for war. The aggressor must feel that the world is there, truly there, and is acting to end the war rather than simply watching the war continue. Thank you to everyone who is truly helping us, helping Ukraine. We also have heard that Sergei Lavrov reached out to the United States and Turkey about the news that Turkey was transferring weapons to Ukraine, and Russia said that it would be having conversations with Trump and with Turkey, Erdogan, about that as well. Now, A report from this past week also shows that Ukraine identified at least 5,816 foreign components in 202 Russian weapons that recently struck within Kyiv. And one of the things that we are seeing with these Russian ballistics, Russian drones, and other Russian weapons is that a lot of U.S. component parts have been found in these Russian weapons that have killed Ukrainians. I want to bring on right now, and this is a very important interview. I want you to pay attention to it. I want to bring on a group of lawyers who I've been speaking with in the United States, who have brought lawsuits here in the United States against American corporations, against American companies, some of which Donald Trump has acquired equity stakes in on behalf of the United States. And these lawyers talk about their lawsuits against American corporations, where there are allegations that these American corporations had a duty to realize that their semiconductor chips and other electronic parts are being used against Ukraine. I want to bring in these lawyers now. You want to watch this interview. This is a very important interview we just did on the MeidasTouch Network. Let's bring it in. Now I want to bring in the lawyers who are bringing this very significant and important case. Dustin Dow and Lauren Attard from Bacon Hostetler filed this case against numerous American companies as the parts and the semiconductors, the chips, have been found in a lot of these weapons that have killed Ukrainians, maimed and injured, slaughtered Ukrainians. And there's a duty, there's obligations, it's being argued in this lawsuit for these American companies to ensure that these parts, or to take steps to make sure these parts aren't getting into the hands of Russia or others that are actually being used to kill and injure Ukrainians. And when you talk about a company like Intel, it's a company that the United States has a significant ownership stake in. And we know that Donald Trump wants to have more ownership stakes in semiconductor companies, and this becomes a real issue. So, Dustin, let's start with you. Talk to us about this case, why it's so important, what our audience should really know about these American component parts that find their ways in weapons that are being used to kill Ukrainians.
Sure, Ben, I really appreciate your attention on this topic. So this case is important because it really asks a fundamental question, and that's this. What responsibility do these American tech companies have when their products repeatedly, over and over, show up in weapons that are used to kill civilians, and in this case, used to kill civilians in Ukraine? The reality is that Intel and these other defendants have shirked this responsibility, and it's led to death and destruction throughout Ukraine. So our plaintiffs are Ukrainian families who have suffered devastating losses from Russian missiles and drones. And these major U.S. semiconductor manufacturers and distributors, in this case, have had years of warnings that their components were being diverted into the Russian military supply chain, whether going through China or North Korea or Iran or even directly to Russia. And yet they have failed to take reasonable and necessary steps to stop it. And we're not talking here about one or two isolated parts that somehow ended up in the wrong hands. If we were, that'd be a different case. But this is a case about repeated patterns where the same tech components from the same companies are appearing in the same types of Russian weapons over and over that are being used to kill Ukrainian civilians. And this is not about politics. It's not about whether you support Ukraine or you oppose Russia and Putin. This is about accountability and foreseeability. The reality is, if Intel knows that its products are repeatedly ending up in weapons that are being used against civilians, does it have a duty to investigate? Does it have a duty to strengthen its controls? And does it have a duty to attempt to stop that diversion from continuing? And we say that it does. The reality is that today, technologies that power modern life are also the technologies that power modern warfare. In this case, asks whether these corporations can simply look the other way, stick their heads in the sand when they are repeatedly alerted that their products are being used to facilitate atrocities. And it's an issue with global implications for technology, for for human rights, and in this case, for corporate responsibility.
Yeah, and you see semiconductor companies, for a lot of this year, kind of bragging about their record profits. We see the United States taking ownership stakes in companies like Intel. You see the president of the United States. Again, this isn't a political position that I'm making. It's an objective reality that he made 21,000 stock trades last year, and he's heavily invested in a lot of these companies that also happen to be defendants in this case. And so it raises a lot of these questions, and also it raises questions also when you hear these deals. Okay, we're going to be giving this type of chip to the UAE. We're going to be giving this type of chip to China. We're going to be giving these types of chips over here and there. What obligations exist there, and what's actually already been happening behind the scenes, where do they already have this technology because there's a distribution network that works with these companies that may be looking the other way to give these chips, ultimately to the end user? And that, I know in a lot of the research that you found, China's involvement as well. Lauren, can you speak to that and what else are we learning?
Yeah, what's really important to know here, Ben, is that we're alleging that these American companies, Intel, Texas Instruments, AMD, and Mouser, they're continuing to send their chips into a supply chain that they know Russia and Iran are using to manufacture missiles and drones. They know that there are leaks in this supply chain. And as Dustin mentioned, we're not just talking about one component. Everyone thinks about guidance chips, but it's also signal processing and communications and power regulation. It's basically the entire gamut of electronic components in a missile. So not only is this leading to the horrendous atrocities in Ukraine, such as the murder of 9 children on a playground in broad daylight with a ballistic missile armed with a cluster warhead, but the leaky supply chain's also leading to a criminal case here in Massachusetts where American components were found in an Iranian drone that killed 3 U.S. service members in Jordan in 2024. So we as Americans cannot just assume that this supply chain issue won't affect us here at home. Every American should be concerned because we do not know the extent of the problem. We know Russia and Iran are using these missiles and drones overseas, but we don't know the American chips that are pointed directly at the United States right now. American companies need to and can stop their products from being used against America and her allies. Ukrainians have had to learn this lesson at an unbearable cost, and we would be so foolish not to learn this lesson before it hits us directly here at home.
Yeah, and one of the things as we are observing modern warfare, is seeing now how a lot of these component parts, have resulted in other countries now being able to spoof them and to recalibrate them and to, I don't know, the way I try to almost think about it is, when you look at almost different and oversimplified way, when people, kind of deconstruct cars here and take the different car parts and then make them better and kind of, kind of a do it yourself. But the parts are originating from these American companies, who again, I guess it's short-term profit. You look at what's you look at what's happening with a lot of these companies. You look at Intel. Even though it's had a little bit of a rough go at it over the past few weeks or so, but early on, especially when the U.S. announced its investment, I think the stock went up like 327% in this, in the past year alone, while the U.S. maintains an ownership stake. But one of the issues that lots of people raise is what's the long term for all of this? There may be Q1, Q2 record profits, but kind of long term, we're given just from an economic perspective, if we have a long term view, you're giving away a lot of the technology that can then be copied overseas. But then more significantly, in terms of, you mentioned, Lauren, U.S. service members have gotten killed, from this, and we see in Ukraine all these Ukrainians getting killed and maimed. And so, Dustin, kind of, your final take on this before we go, and then Lauren, I'll give you kind of a final take before we go.
Sure, Ben. You make a good point when you link the way we fight wars to the profits that these companies make. And the reality is we've come a long way in terms of how we fight war. And this case highlights that. And I think it may be an uncomfortable reality. In the 21st century, right now, major conflicts, like what's happening in Ukraine, like what's happening in Iran, these are not sustained only by armies or even primarily by armies, but by supply chains. And so the question really comes down to is whether companies that possess these sophisticated tracing capabilities, like all of these defendants do, like Intel does, companies that have compliance programs and market intelligence, can they ignore repeated evidence that their products are reaching prohibited or dangerous military end users in places like Russia, in North Korea, and Iran? Can they stick their heads in the sand and ignore that evidence? And we say that they can't. And ultimately, what we are trying to do with this case is draw a line and say when civilian lives are at stake, like they are here in this matter in Ukraine, companies simply cannot be passive observers. This is about creating not just a means of compensation for the victims in this case, but an incentive to prevent this type of stuff from continuing to happen. The reality is that sanctions and export controls that are levied by the United States government only work if companies take them seriously in practice. And so really this case asks a very simple question, but it's one with enormous consequences. And that is when American technology repeatedly ends up in weapons that kill civilians. Can companies ignore the warnings, or do they have a responsibility to act? And we say they have a responsibility to act.
Lauren, want to just hear from you too before we go.
Sure, thanks, Ben. You mentioned what could happen when our technology gets overseas. I think one of the things that's really important to remember here is how exceptional America is at making these kind of semiconductor components. And we have been for the last, I think, 60 years. So when Vladimir Putin wants to make a precision guided missile, he wants an American chip inside that missile to make it work. So we can't just rely on these policies and procedures and red tape to try to help and paper over this idea that American companies are doing the best they can. We have to do better. We can. It's possible.
Dustin, Lauren, thanks for joining us. Their law firm's Baker Hostetler. We're going to keep following this case. It was originally filed in Texas state court, removed to Texas federal court. We know there's still a bunch of motion practice, and so keep us updated on what's happening there. We want to give an update, and it says just broader implications across the board about, whether we're talking about Ukraine, whether we're talking about Middle East, whether we're talking about Asia, whether we're talking about Europe. I mean, the world is watching. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Ben.
Everybody hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers.
Before you go, our book, WTF America, is available for pre-order now. It's the story of how we got here and how we fight our way back. To pre-order, scan the QR code or click the link in the description. Let's do this.